Hello, this is Paranormal Girl, and today, continuing with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, I've already spoken about the red horse of war, the white horse of conquest, the black horse of famine, and now I'm going to talk about the pale horse. When I opened the fourth seal, I heard the fourth living creature say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death. And Hades followed with him, and power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. Revelation 6:7-8. The Office of Statistics and Programming of the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, part of the Centers for Disease Control, supplies an interesting list of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. The data includes all ages and races and both sexes for the year 2001, the latest year for which such figures are available. The number beside the cause of death is how many Americans are known to have died of that particular affliction of that year. So we will look at the list here. Number 1, heart disease. 7,142 people died of heart disease that year. Number 2, malignant neoplasms, which are cancerous tumors. 553,768. Number 3, cerebral vascular diseases, which are strokes, 163,538. Number 4, chronic lower respiratory diseases, which include bronchitis, emphysema, and asthma, 123,013. Number 5, unintentional injury, which was 101,537. Number 6 was diabetes mellitus, 71,372. Number 7 was influenza and pneumonia, which was 62,034. Number 8 was Alzheimer's disease, which was 53,852. Number 9 was nephritis, which is a kidney disease, 39,480. And number 10 was septicemia, which is blood poisoning. 32,238 people died that year. Though the media make a great deal of noise about terrorism, accidents, murder and suicide, all terrible tragedies, the far greater killer is disease. Only one cause of death in this top 10 list is something other than disease. For example, unintentional injury. Of the total deaths among the 10 leading causes, over 1.9 million, which is 94.66%, just under 1.8 million, are caused by disease. In addition, most of these diseases are in many respects self-inflicted, caused by years of abuse through overeating or poor nutrition, smoking, drinking, or dealing with known carcinogens. The number one killer, which is heart disease, usually occurs years after of poor diet, lack of exercise, and the fatigue and stress of everyday living. On the other hand, diseases that erupt and spread after war and famine, plague, dysentery, tuberculosis, smallpox, cholera, typhus, and the like do not even make the list. Other than in times of war, and sometimes even during them, as now, disease kills far more than violence or its aftermath. The pestilential plagues of today, the years leading up to Christ's return, are cancers, sexually transmitted diseases or STDs, and long-term organ abuse diseases like heart, kidney, liver, and lung diseases. These occur by the millions in our so-called advanced societies with our cutting-edge medical technology, superior pharmaceuticals, and highly trained and experienced specialists and surgeons. As far as medical science has come, and frankly, at no time in man's history has it come farther, it is still a long way from solving the mystery of disease and death. The final actor of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse bears the name of Death and rides on a horse the colour of deathly ghastliness. As one commentator aptly describes it, he efficiently sweeps up and disposes of what his fellows leave behind. In the final tally ending the lives of up to a quarter of the Earth's population. To use a sports analogy, he is the anchor, the strongest, most lethal member of the fearsome foursome relay team, and he is off and running. Pestilential symbols. The 4th seal is introduced by the 4th living creature, identified in Revelation 4-7 as like a flying eagle. In the United States, we think of eagles as noble and majestic creatures, sharp-eyed, sharp talons, fierce and swift in striking their prey, mating for life, and caring tenderly for their young. The Bible's view includes these characteristics but adds one more. They are carrion eaters. Leviticus 11-13 refers to eagles as being forbidden to the Israelites as food. These you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. Eagles are listed first in the company of vultures and buzzards. And Proverbs 30-17 speaks of the young eagles eating the eye of one who mocks and scorns his parents. Perhaps the best known biblical reference to this aspect of eagles appears in Matthew 24-28 and also in Luke 17-37, in which Jesus says, "For wherever the carcass is, the eagles will be gathered together." The flying eagle then needs to be seen in both lights, as a swift and deadly hunter spying out its prey from afar, as well as detestable eater of putrefying flesh. The first reflects God's position as the divine and sovereign judge on high, and the second, the grisly and dreadful effects of his judgment for sin. It is a picture of a noble and righteous God, obliged by his own holiness to execute the prescribed penalty for human transgression. Characteristically, the Apostle John describes the 4th horse and rider using a paucity of verbiage. The horse is pale, the rider's name is Death, and Hades follows him. This is the extent of the biblical description, yet even so these provide us with sufficient clues to deduce a cogent interpretation. First, the horse's coat is unique and outwardly pale. The Greek word is chlouros, which we recognize as the original of such English words as chlorine, chloroform, and chlorophyll. It technically refers to a greenish yellow colour found in nature in the pale green of just sprouted grass or new leaves. These are the chlouros, only other occurrences in the New Testament. Secular Greek writers, however, did not confine chlouros just to sprouting plants. In the Iliad, Homer describes fearful men's faces with this term, suggesting a pallid, ashen colour, and in other instances it is the pale golden colour of honey or the grey bark of an olive tree. Sophocles writes that it is the colour of sand, while Thucydides applies this to the skin colour of those suffering from the plague. It is the last description that's probably John's intended meaning. The colour of the horse reminded him of the pale, greenish-grey colour of a corpse or decaying flesh. The Phillips translation renders chlouros a sickly green in colour. The New English and Revised English Bibles as a sickly pale. The New Jerusalem Bible as deathly pale. And the New Living Translation as pale green like a corpse. The 4th horse sports a coat only producers of horror movies would love. Upon the back of this gruesome beast sits one whose name is Death. This is another unique feature of this horseman, as none of the others receives a name. The Greek word for the normal word for death is thanatos, suggesting on the surface a generic application of the term. However, this would be jumping to a conclusion, for a term is probably meant to be understood more specifically as pestilence or disease. The evidence for the meaning here derives primarily from the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. In several places, the Septuagint translators rendered the Hebrew word deba, meaning pestilence or disease, and thanatos, for instance, in Exodus 5:3, Moses and Aaron tell Pharaoh, please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence. In Hebrew, deba, Greek thanatos, or with the sword. This combination of the translations also occur in the 5th plague, that is murrain or cattle disease. God tells Moses to inform Pharaoh there will be a very severe pestilence. In a latter instance, God warns Judah through Jeremiah, I will send pestilence among you till they are consumed from the land that I give to them and their fathers. The most convincing piece of the evidence of thanatos, meaning pestilence, in this passage comes from the mouth of our Saviour in the Olivet prophecy, and as he describes the events leading up to his return. He prophesies to his disciples, and there will be famines, which is the 3rd seal or horseman, pestilence, 4th seal or horseman, and earthquakes in various places. He does not use thanatos, but liamos, which literally means pestilence or disease. Once Jesus himself weighs in, there is no argument. The pale rider brings death by disease. Constant companions. The final descriptive item regarding the 4th seal is Hades following with him. Obviously, Hades has been left untranslated in the New King James. It is hell in the Authorized Version. Strong's Concordance defines this simply as the place of departed souls. Although this is in itself an interpretive definition, a more complete definition would include that it's the proper name of the Greek god of the lower regions, known as Pluto by the Romans, who gave his name to the realms of the dead in Thayer's Greek lexicon. However, this barely scratches the surface of the subject. The complete word study New Testament adds, in Homer and Hesiod, the word is spelt HA?D?S, meaning obscure, dark, invisible, and suggesting that it's a place or condition about which mortal man understands little. The same reference work mentions that it equates to the Hebrew word Sheol, that in the New Testament passages which it occurs, Hades is associated with death, with the possible exceptions of Matthew 11:23 and Luke 10-15. Cutting through all the scholarly speculation, much of which is based on either Jewish or Greek, not necessarily biblical, conceptions of Sheol or Hades, the basic idea is the grave, the place where the dead go after death. As Solomon writes so plainly, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where they are going. Many scriptures show that God will resurrect or redeem us from the grave, not from some shadowy netherworld of spirits. For instance, the psalmist writes, but God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave. And God prophesies through Ezekiel, then you shall know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up to your graves. Jesus himself says, do not marvel at this. for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. The Old Testament instruction carried into the New is that death and the grave are parallel, if not synonymous, ideas. Notice, for instance, these passages. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In the grave, who will give you thanks? Like sheep they are laid in the grave. Death shall feed on them. I am, drift among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, and who are cut from your hand. What man can live and not see death? Can he deliver his life from the power of the grave? For love is strong as death, jealousy is cruel as the grave. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be your plagues. O death, I will be your destruction. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. These verses are sent to the common sense truth of Revelation 6:8, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. Death in this case by pestilence, and the grave Hades or Sheol, the abode of the dead, and the inseparable companions. Where one goes, the other must follow, because they are essentially the same. One can argue they are technically different, that death is a cessation of life, and the grave is a repository of a person's earthly remains, but the difference is purely semantic. In the end, they both describe a state of lifelessness and corruption, of being cut off from the living and from God. Wild beasts. A minor controversy exists concerning the last half of verse 8, and the power was given to them over the fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth. The argument deals with whether this sentence applies to the fourth horseman alone, or summarizes the dependations of all four. The latter seems preferable. Jesus appears to treat the first four seals as a subgroup of his Olivet prophecy, saying of them, all these are the beginning of sorrows. His intent is clear. These four judgments are the distinct set of the calamities that acts as a kind of warm-up for the exceedingly more terrible judgments of the time of the end. And he warns, see that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. It is entirely logical to believe that the same revelator would likewise separate the four horsemen from the last three seals with a short summary of their work, as well as the limits of their authority. Another proof involves the fact that the sentence restates the missions of the red to kill with a sword, black with hunger, and pale with death. As above, Thanatos meaning disease, horseman. Applying these means of destruction to the fourth horseman alone would make the other two redundant and significantly diminish their roles. In addition, lumping pestilence in with hunger, war, and beasts as activities of the fourth horseman would obscure the role of disease as a judgment of God. Commentators argue that the plural pronoun them in Revelation 6:8 has death and Hades as its antecedents. They are certainly the closest antecedents, but the Greek does not demand them to be the pronoun's true antecedents. Besides, the real subject of the previous sentence is not really death and Hades, but the singular name of the fourth horseman. If God intended it to be a summary statement of the whole passage, we can easily recognize them to refer to the entire subject's active characters, the four horsemen, the ones to whom the Lamb gave authority to execute his judgment. A final curious factor in the inclusion of by the beasts of the earth in the powers of the horsemen, it seems to come out of the blue. However, it follows naturally in the progression of catastrophes. In times of severe war, famine and disease, depopulation occurs, which upsets the precarious balance between human civilization and wildlife. Suddenly, with hunting and developing of wilderness areas reduced or eliminated, the population of predatory creatures expands, increasing the chances of animal attacks on humans. The Bible provides an example of this in Genesis 10:8-9. It's thought that Nimrod's rise to power over the post-flood world began with his skills in hunting and killing predators, which had the upper hand over the minuscule human population at the time. Another example appears in Exodus 23-29, in which God promises Israel, "I will not drive the Canaanites out from before you in 1 year, lest the land becomes too desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you." Incursions of lions actually kill some of the Samaritans after Assyria took the bulk of the Israelites into captivity. Wild beasts are included in the curses for disobedience in Leviticus 26. "And I also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, destroy your livestock, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate." Through Ezekiel, God prophesies that disasters such as the 4 horsemen happen together with the scourge of wild beasts. "So I will send against you famine and wild beasts, and they will bereave you. Pestilence and blood shall pass through you, and I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken." Though death by wild beasts is included in the text of Revelation 6:8 without warning, it fits nonetheless. Reminder of God's judgment. It is clear that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the first 4 seals, parallel Jesus' prophecy in Matthew 24:4-8, which ends with the words, "All these are the beginning of sorrows." Our Saviour is letting us know that deception, violence, scarcity and disease are only preludes to the catastrophic events of the last days. We could paraphrase his remark as, "These calamities are par for the course and demand civilization, far worse is yet to come." The progression of disasters, of false ideas leading to war, war to famine, famine to pestilence, and pestilence to wild beast. It's vital to understand the spiritual teaching underlying the 4 horsemen. Through a kind of parable, Jesus is instructing us in the principle of cause and effect. If people believe the message of the Father of murder, which is John 8:44, rather than the Prince of Peace in Isaiah 9-6, they will eventually turn to murder and war to resolve their differences. Like the law of gravity, war causes shortages of food, producing malnutrition and opening the door to disease. God is showing us these sorrows trace their roots back to the disobedience and rejection of Him. Mankind has built his civilization on a foundation of sand, and it is no longer that disasters ensue upon mankind with terrifying regularity. Because God is just, it cannot be otherwise. He has said, "The wages of sin is death." Romans 6:23, "and the soul who sins shall die." In addition, He has given us 2 sets of blessings and cursing to provide us frightening and vivid depictions of what happens when we disobey Him. The 4 horsemen are similar warnings or reminders that He is still on His throne, judging mankind for his sins. See that you do not refuse Him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused Him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace, by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire.